Now that we've learned a little bit about the building block of life, the cell, we can start kind of at the bottom of the hierarchy that builds life, the right-hand side of Uno's cube that we looked at earlier in this lecture series, and work our way upwards. That's just a very simple way of learning biology, starting at the bottom and working our way to the top. So we'll start at the bottom with molecules and chemistry and see how that plays into how life is put together. Chemistry really is the basis of biology. Physics, you might say, is the basis of chemistry, and math is the basis of physics. But since we're learning just about biology, we don't have to go all the way down to physics and math. We can just go one step below where we're at and learn about chemistry and how it affects us. Chemical reactions are what keeps life going. So, for example, when you light a match and burn some gasoline, you're taking something that has carbon and hydrogen, or it's a hydrocarbon, and you're allowing it to get hot enough to interact with the oxygen so that the oxygen and the hydrocarbon can come together and form CO2 and water and generate a lot of heat. That's a chemical reaction. And that similar thing happens inside of life to give it its usable energy. The smallest chemical reaction that you could think of is a hydrogen gas, which is H plus H, becoming two separate H's, breaking apart. And even that very, very small reaction requires space to occur. And since life requires a lot of different reactions in order to get energy and keep the information flowing, it requires the space of quite a lot of reactions. And those reactions have to happen all at the same time, so they can't have one reaction happen and then another one in the same spot. They have to have their own little spots to react. So that makes it so that life can't really happen on diameters of less than about 0.2 of a micron, 0.2 microns. And anything below that is really just a static little nugget. It doesn't really have the kind of chemistry that can keep the life going and going and going. So when you want to filter out life, you can filter it through a 0.2 micron filter, and you pretty much get everything alive out of there, which is convenient if you're trying to keep things sterile. But why that is because chemistry itself takes up space, and chemistry is what is the basis of biology. We need to understand chemistry in order to understand the different things about life. For example, its preconditions. Why is one of the preconditions of life having water? Well, it's because of chemistry. For example, the hydrophobic effect only happens in water. Water is hydrophobic. It's afraid of water. The hydrophobic effect means being afraid of water. And certain molecules are afraid of water. They want to avoid water. And that effect is critical to life's molecular machines. It only works in water. Water is also one of the only liquids at temperatures less than 100 degrees C, and it's the only one that screens charges effectively. So without charge screening, you would not have the ability to have molecules coming together. They'd bounce apart and they'd push each other apart because of that charge repulsion. So thermal chemistry shows us what has to be happening for energy to be usable, and we're going to be learning about that later on in the course. An activity that helps you understand the building blocks of life, these atomic building blocks, and what it means for the next level up is to think about how small could you build a working pair of pliers out of only Lego building blocks. Okay, so you can picture Lego building blocks, how big they are. Okay, can you make a working pair of pliers that actually closes and opens effectively with just 2 of those Lego blocks? Probably not. You need several Lego blocks and some hinges to make it a really working Lego pair of pliers, and it would be much larger than the very smallest size you can imagine just by laying 2 Legos like this next to each other. Similarly, if you want a working molecular machine, you need to have many atoms and many molecules put together in order for that machine to work. So thinking about Legos and thinking about the atoms inside of a cell help you understand why life's molecular machines have to be the size that they are. A group of students actually tried to make something out of Legos much more complicated than a pair of pliers. They tried to make an atomic force microscope. Now, if you've never heard of an AFM, atomic force microscope, it is kind of like one of those old-timey phonographs that would play LP discs. It would go on the surface of the vinyl disc, and it would feel bumps up and down. And it would play music or voices based on what it would feel. Now, in an AFM, the needle is only a few atoms wide. So instead of feeling fairly large vinyl bumps, it can feel atoms. That's why it's called an atomic force microscope. And instead of having a sort of plastic arm, like on a phonograph, this atomic force microscope has a very small and very sensitive arm that can move up and down just enough for one atom to go past. And the deflection of that is measured by a laser that really accurately measures these tiny, tiny motions. Now, can you build that with a Lego? Well, in 2013, a group of students attempted this, and they weren't able to see atoms, but they were able to get a working prototype that could sense bumps. And doing it out of Legos really allowed them to make it very quickly, but it also showed how big you would have to make it. You couldn't make it as small as the typical AFM because it was made out of Lego points. Now, we've been talking a lot in general about chemistry. What are the building blocks of life? Well, there are 4 building blocks for DNA, as I've already mentioned. Most people just know them by their first letter, the A, the T, the G, and the C. But you can easily see that the pictures of them are much more complicated than just the letter A. They actually have ring-like structures. A has 2 rings, so does G. C and T only have 1 ring. And A goes with T because of special bonds that happen. There are 2 special bonds between the A and the T, and there are 3 special bonds that are in a slightly different order that bond between the G and the C. And the important part of those building blocks is that they perfectly fit together, so that A can only go with T and G can only go with C, and they don't cross talk. Now, there are 20 or 21 different letters in the protein alphabet, and those are even more complicated because there are 20 of them. But the most important part about them is that they each have an amino end that has a nitrogen in it and an acid end that has a COOH group. Okay, it's got a carbon, 2 oxygens, and a hydrogen. That's why protein building blocks are called amino acids. And when you eat protein, you take a bite of a big hamburger or something, you're getting amino acids into your body. So proteins and amino acids, they go together. The amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. They have amino ends and they have the acid end. And those are what couple them into a chain. The amino end can bind to the acid end and form a link to make a long and skinny chain. So that's the important part of the building blocks of life. And the important part of this lecture is to know that chemistry is the basis of biology. And if you understand sort of what's happening at the ground floor, you can start working your way up one level at a time. Now, if you're going a little bit deeper, you can read the branch, How Are Atoms Arranged to Form Molecules, and all of the leaves that are under them. It has 4 leaves. It's like a little mini chemistry textbook that's geared to understanding biology. If you take the quizzes that are on each of the 4 levels and do well, you can feel like you've learned enough chemistry to be a biologist.